Hello, hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Hello. Hello, hello. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello.
Hello, this is Ron Rice. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, great, Ron. Yeah, we got the speakers up here now.
Oh, hi, Django. Okay, yeah.
Yep. All right. It is a couple of minutes past 11. Uh, Good morning, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us for our EREC Faculty Programmatic Series seminar. We are almost coming to the end of the year. We have two more faculty extension agents who would be presenting. And today we have Dr. Matthew VanWeelden, who is going to talk about exploring sugarcane and rice extension programs that he has been working on here in the EAA. So with that, Matt, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Okay. Alrighty. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Matthew VanWeelden. I'm the Agronomic Crops Extension Agent for Palm Beach County and University of Florida Extension. And today I'm going to be giving my portion of this programmatic series, which is going to be exploring some of the programs in my sugarcane and rice extension program here in the University of Florida. So to begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, especially for those who may not know my background. But I was born and raised in the exciting state of Indiana, if anybody's ever been there. Not the most exciting place ever, but that's where I was born. And then I did my bachelor's and master's at Purdue University, studying urban entomology, specifically ant behavioral ecology. So actually, before I went into ag, I was on the urban side. So I kind of defected towards the end when I started my PhD, which I did my PhD, completed it in 2015 at Louisiana State University, studying under Dr. Gene Reagan, the late Dr. Gene Reagan, doing sugarcane work involving an invasive moth called the Mexican rice borer that has actually been detected here in Florida as well. And then in 2015, I moved down to further south to Florida. It's about as far south as I can go from Indiana, and took this position here at the University of Florida, Life Extension in Palm Beach County, replacing my current boss, Ron Rice, when he moved up to his director position in the county. So just the two main programmatic areas for my job are focus heavily on sugarcane agronomy and integrated pest management, and then rice integrated pest management and best management practices involving rice systems in South Florida. Kind of breaking those down a little bit even further. Again, I talked about pest management and sugarcane. I also do some farm safety work involving spray application for large ground sprayers. I'll actually be going over that program a little bit today as one of the examples. And then I help do some of the variety of adoption programs with our sugarcane industry and compile all of our data for our annual sugarcane census, which has been a very valuable tool for many of our growers because it allows them to kind of see the general trends of sugarcane production in the EAA and kind of helps them use that as a decision-making tool. And that's published each year in the Sugar Journal. And now, as of this year, the Louisiana census is also included in that. So that's a very useful issue for the entire U.S. sugar industry. And then the rice My rice program, again, pest management, again, relating primarily to insects, but I also do some weed and pathology work. And then one of the main programs in my under my rice major program is the varietal assessment, where we look at different rice varieties for Florida. I'll be going over that in more detail again also later in this program. And then some impacts of water and soil on rice, specifically working with Dr. Django Bada and some of his programs. And then I do technically have a sod appointment as well, but my sod appointment's been very minimal. We've looked at some best management practices and fertilizer requirements for sod production in the area, but other than that, it's been fairly minimal. So I won't really touch on that too much during this program today. So just to kind of go over extension, because sometimes most of you probably know what extension is, but there could be people online that may not really know what extension is in great detail because they're on the main campus and they're not really exposed to that. But extension is really part of this land grant university system, one of those 3 pillars, which University of Florida is our land grant institution for the state of Florida. And this was created by the Morrill Act of 1862, which created the teaching institution. That's the main campus. That's where students go to learn and get degrees in various fields. Research, which was created by the Hatch Act of 1887. It created experiment stations such as this in order to conduct agricultural research. And then in 1914, we had the Smith-Lever Act, which was the extension, the 3rd pillar, which is what I fall under. And really the primary focus of this is to disseminate the information out to the clientele, which originates from this research side, and to assist people that are already in the workforce. So teaching them, so instead of teaching students really particularly, we're teaching people that are already in the workforce in order to improve various aspects of their lives. So I just like to kind of have this as a general slide. And really what one of the missions that we do in extension, one of the main goals is that we try to fill in these needs of the clientele. So my clientele are predominantly people involved in sugarcane and rice industry in South Florida. So you look at this, when we identify clientele needs, you have here at the bottom, this is what the level is right now on something, whether it be, available varieties or control of some insect pest or something. And up here is where the level should be. So you have this big gap here, and that's that need, which extension is designated to fill. And we do that by holding various workshops, field days, educational activities, and again, disseminating a lot of this information that comes out from the research side. So various examples of educational activities that I conduct in particular and other extension faculty conduct. We do workshops. You probably see a lot of the workshops here at this ERAC. We do a lot of extension activities here because that's one of the main purposes, one of the primary purposes of this experiment station. Field days. We have several field days. We have our rice field day. We have, I know there's some vegetable field days that are done or that are conducted here. We have our open houses that we have that, especially the one that we're going to have in April. And then we also do various site visits. Instead of bringing the clientele here, we might go out and visit the clientele in their own fields to help determine what their issue is and how we can solve it. And then we also conduct in-service trainings. In-service trainings aren't really aimed at the clientele per se, but more of the actual people within IFAS. So we're going to be teaching, like usually you'll see specialists in IFAS that may conduct ISTs in order to educate people within IFAS so that they can better educate the people in their clientele in their respective areas. So it's more of like workforce training, professional development. So I'm involved with some of that as well. And then we also have grower surveys and hotlines. I know, for example, I don't really have, I do have work with Christian Cameron in the adjacent county looking at, we have a sugarcane growers newsletter that we put out that helps get information out. I'll show how some of that is incorporated into one of the programs that we have involving lesser cornstalk borer. But I know our Anna, our vegetable agent, her and Craig Fry have that vegetable hotline, which is very successful at getting information out. So that's another example of types of educational activities that the extension faculty can use to better fill in that gap, that need that is in whatever industry that they're working in or specific area. So now that I've talked a little bit about my background and what is extension and what do extension faculty and agents do, I'm going to go over some of the major programs that I have that I conduct yearly. I have several programs, but since we only have about 50 minutes or so, I'm only going to be able to touch on a few of them, and I'll divide these up first in some of the sugarcane programs, and then I'll talk about a couple of the programs that I have in rice, in order to give you kind of examples of some of the work that I do for those who are not familiar. So for major sugarcane extension programs, which I'll provide examples of today, we have involve arthropod pest management. I'll go over a couple examples. We have we've done work on sugarcane rust mite, and then we've also done work on lesser cornstalk borer. So I'll talk about those two. And then calibration of large spray equipment. This kind of goes into that farm safety side, ag safety, and this involves an event that we hold each year called the Spray Rodeo, which actually will be it'll be here next Tuesday. We'll be having our annual Spray Rodeo here at the Everglades REC. And this has been a very, very valuable experience or field day for operators of large spray equipment. And I'll tell you many reasons why once we get to that segment of the talk. So I think most of us are fairly familiar with sugarcane, but I always just do a quick overview because I don't know who's on Zoom land right now. But it's about a 388,000 acre industry was harvested last year according to our census. We grow roughly, probably in terms of acres, about half the acreage in the United States, the other half being in Louisiana. Plantings going on right now, and harvest. It goes through late December, and harvest is from October to May. And our industry is really divided on these two major soil types. On my side, on Palm Beach County, I deal mainly with the organic soils, the production on the organic side, while my counterpart, Christian Kammer, deals more with the sugarcane on the sandy soils out in Hendry and Glades counties. And that makes up about 30% of the total acreage. And then sugarcane's rotated with rice, sweet corn, and leafy vegetables. And this is the area for those in Zoom land that may not be familiar that we're kind of focusing on right here in the Everglades agricultural area. Just crop rotation cycles. It's a 4-year cycle pretty much. So you have a planting, you have a plant cane, and then you'll have 2 or 3 successive crops after that, which are about 12 to 16 months long. Sugarcane is a large tropical grass. It is a perennial crop, so it will grow back each year. And then depending on when it's harvested, it'll have some sort of rotational crop during the fall to springtime, usually some sort of vegetables or sweet corn. And during the summertime, we'll plant rice as a rotational crop with sugarcane. So going into some of the pest management work that I've conducted in the past, this kind of goes more on my applied research side, because extension now we're really, I wouldn't say told, but we're really expected to conduct applied research. And I have a research background coming from my work at Purdue and Louisiana State. So even though I have a 100% teaching appointment or 100% extension appointment, I do conduct applied research in collaboration with many of the faculty here on station. But the first of these I'm going to go over is our work that was with the sugarcane rust mite. This was discovered in quotations in Florida in 2007, but there was some evidence that this could have been here earlier than that because it was possibly misidentified. As you can see, due to the very small size of this mite, it's usually prone to being misidentified, or they think that they might be something else. This is the mite itself right here. It kind of has an oval, elongate body, and it has a lot of different waxy kind of growths on it. So sometimes the shapes aren't exactly the same each time. And populations tend to peak mid to late summer during those real hot months, around that, usually peaking around July and August. And feeding symptoms include an orange to reddish discoloration on the sugarcane leaf, which I'll show here in a second. But one of the problems that with growers that have is that there's really not any available miticides to control this pest in Florida. This pest isn't here year after year after year, but it does show up in higher amounts in some varieties than others. But then again, there's really no tool in the grower's toolbox in order to combat it. So this is that reddening of the leaf tissue caused by the feeding. This can be mistaken sometimes as the sugarcane, the orange rust and brown rust, but you don't see those pustules on there like you do with some of those pathogens, those diseases. This is more of a diffuse kind of reddish brown with lacking pustules, and that's usually what the sugarcane rust mite damage on the leaf, the feeding symptoms on the leaf looks like. So what we did in order to make this easy, because the rust mite itself is very difficult to see under a hand, even with a hand lens, it's very, very small. We kind of, in order to make it easier for growers and for scouting, we developed this 0 to 3 scale on measuring the symptoms, injury following feeding by the sugarcane rust mite. 0 being no discoloration on the leaf material, so this is the lowest level. And then 1, less than 25%, moderate 25 to 75%, and then heavy, anything above 75%. It's a pretty crude scale, but for some of the experiments that we conducted, this is what we did, because otherwise it would take forever to be able to look at the symptoms on these each of these individual leaves. So in 2016, we actually started, this was in collaboration with Dr. Julian Buslin. And I actually worked a little bit with Greg Nestle, because he was doing some work on this in his lab when he was kind of coming out of that entomology position and into his more into his director role. We started this in 2016. We conducted this trial using CPCL 05-1102 because this was designated as a susceptible variety. We were seeing a lot of this reddening, this symptomatic injury on the leaf tissue. And at that time in 2016, it represented about 3,500 acres of the sugarcane industry. So it was actually considered a principal variety per se, making up at least 1% of the total acreage. In this first trial, it was pretty simple. We just looked at 2 different treatments. These were 20 by 30 foot plots, 4 rows in. We looked at Agrimec, which was is abamectin, and then we had a control. So this was pretty simple. And there's the rate there. And we sampled 20 stalks at different dates. And we looked at the top visible dewlap +1 and +3, because this is typically where you see that injury, because the leaves begin to senesce as it gets further down, and you're not going to be able to, it's going to mask that injury. You can see the sprayer. We did this work also with Mormai at Florida Crystals. And they had this sprayer here that could basically go down the road and spray along those 4 rows in from the sugarcane. Because of the environmental conditions and other aspects, I think that this was our first year. We really didn't see any major differences between the 2 treatments. So in 2017, we expanded this trial, and we had Agrimec again, but then we also included Torac, which was another, and Oberon, which are 2 other miticides, and then still remained with that untreated control. Again, same plot size, 40 by 20 foot plots, 4 rows in. You can see there, us walking along the sides of those. And this was a randomized complete block design with 5 reps. This is some of the data here. You can see the treatment on the side. The pre-treatment, we took pre-treatment counts. And you can see, as expected, we saw about the same. This is that 0 to 3 scale. They were all about the same, which is good. And then we took data 5 days after treatment, 12 days after treatment, and 19 days after treatment. And you could see by 12 days, there was actually a difference. The 3 treatments were equally significantly lower than the untreated check. So there was some progress there on that end. But we were hoping to take even more data, but in 2017, we were hit with Hurricane Irma, and that it kind of wiped out the test. The test was blown over, and it really wasn't useful anymore. So we did it again in 2018, same exact thing, same experimental design, except this time we went all the way out to 51 days after treatment. And you could see, you still saw those similar results, significantly lower leaf symptoms on those treated plots. And it would still remain significantly lower even after 51 days. So we kind of wanted to show how the residual, the longevity of these individual treatments here. But you could see also that we were getting into that later period where the rust mite population started to decline anyway. That's why the untreated check, while still significantly higher, was beginning to get closer to those other values as well. So this was something that we had worked on. We found out that miticides can reduce rust mite injury levels in sugarcane up to 51 days. But we also tried to take yield data, and the yield data was inconclusive, which is really the main thing you want to see is some sort of yield differences. I think with something like this, it would need to be tested on such large plots because you may not be able to distinguish those yield differences on smaller plots. but we didn't continue this work because some of these varieties that we'd work with were becoming to decline. But we've still been trying to, and there really wasn't the growers didn't think it was a great need at that time. Then also we were getting into COVID and all of that. But this is something that we've been kind of putting on the back burner to maybe try again with some susceptible varieties, looking at the some of these efficacies for rust mite control due to that lack of available miticides in Florida. But they're still very much unknown with this arthropod. So the second insect on the sugarcane side that I'll be going over is the lesser cornstalk borer. This is an insect that appears more often, maybe not in the greatest numbers in our industry, but it does appear year after year. You can see here it is it's a pyralid, so it's a stem boring moth. You can see the larvae here. It's a kind of a reddish brown turquoise. I mean, it's actually kind of some of the colors can be quite pretty sometimes, but they do vary from time to time. And then the moths end up the adult stage here, which is the non-damaging stage. The damaging stage is the larvae. The moth looks like this, and it's more of a slender brown cream colored moth. Now what happens is they lay the eggs in the soil, they hatch, the larvae go below the soil surface just a little bit, and they bore into the sugarcane stalks. They kind of create these little tubes of mud and soil, which are one of the distinguishing factors. If you dig in near the roots of the sugarcane plant, you can see those entry holes where this larvae enters, and then it bores up throughout the stalk, and it can cause potential yield damage to the sugarcane plant. But one of the main things that it causes, the real susceptible stage of the sugarcane, is that for the 7th leaf stage, when the plants are really small, because that boring, it can damage the meristem and it can cause a dead heart, which then kills the plant. And that can be the real damage. Once the crop is large enough, it can usually withstand some of the yield impacts, and it's usually not as great. But really, we're trying to target these really young, immature plants in that between those two stages. So again, it's sporadic. Populations tend to be clumped in certain areas. There's still a lot of unknown. There was some work done by actually with Hardev years back, but with all the new varieties or all the new cultivars of sugarcane coming to the industry and just the general changes and practices, this is something that we usually like to revisit. But the conditions are sometimes serious under dry conditions, because remember, this is a soil pest when it's going into the stalk. Drier conditions are going to allow a higher survival in those for that larvae. And right now, it's currently managed with insecticides, chlorantraniliprole and lambda-cyhalothrin. But there's also really no formal lesser cornstalk borer thresholds developed in this area either. So again, something that the growers have always indicated, there's work to be done. There's a lot of unknowns. So this is something that actually Christian Kammerer, who is, and then before him, I was working with Stuart Swanson. They were both with my sugarcane counterpart in Hendry County and the adjacent counties. Remember, they're working more on the sugarcane that's on the sandy soils. We began conducting area-wide surveys of lesser cornstalk borer populations throughout the growing season, usually from October through about May. Again, we were really surveying when the plants were in that 4th to 7th leaf stage here. So that's why we wouldn't start, really early in the season or really late in the season, because the amount of the availability of crop this small was in a good distribution was not as great. So we actually began doing a monitoring program, and we used pheromone traps here, like you see. These are Delta traps with a sticky card inside. And if you look in there, there's a little lure that we stick there, and that has the lesser cornstalk borer sex pheromone. So the males are going to pick up that pheromone, and they're going to go in there thinking there's a female, and they're going to get stuck on that sticky card. So it allows us to kind of identify general activity, and these are placed adjacent to sugarcane fields at that stage, so that we can kind of determine what's there. And these traps, again, were placed usually in October to March or into May, and we check them weekly and then get average counts per week. So this is a map of some of the traps that we had out. These traps usually they'll start out with fewer traps in the beginning of the season, and it'll peak, and then it'll kind of go back down a little bit. But we try to create a good distribution of traps. And then we actually will take these trap counts, and you've probably seen them in Christian's, the sugarcane newsletter that we put out each week or every couple weeks. And then Stewart's before that, they manage that newsletter. We put all of our counts in here to allow growers to kind of see what general trends are going on in lesser cornstalk borer numbers in the area. You know, is there any sort of peak times? Is there any times that they're not as high? So this helps kind of determine, lets them plan, gives them some decision-making tools, and then gives us more information just about the population dynamics and seasonality of this pest. Because again, there's still a lot that's unknown. This was some data that we collected from 2020 to 2021. You can see the muck is the kind of dark colored bar, and the sand is the lighter colored bar. And this is the mean monthly lesser cornstalk borer trap counts by month. And you can see definitely some differences on and the monthly trap counts. But what's interesting is here in December and January, this was of the 2020 to 2021 season, we had several heavy precipitation events, which probably knocked down the numbers because of the soil that increased it made the soil saturate with water, which caused larval mortality. And then see in April and May, where it was really high, we had some heavy droughts that year. So that was kind of giving us an idea, maybe the soil moisture has some sort of impact on larval survival for this pest. So in 2023 and 2024, we received funding from the Florida Sugarcane League to kind of dig into this a little bit further. And we took the muck versus sand, which we had been doing, but now we also wanted to look if there was some varietal effect by each soil type. So we're putting our traps in the varieties that are kind of the top 3 to 5 varieties in each respective soil type. And we were also looking at field moisture conditions. And that was done using, we received funding to get these moisture sensors, which allowed us to kind of have an extra bit of data, an extra parameter to see if soil moisture was having some sort of impact on those population fluctuations for the lesser cornstalk borer. Which then eventually way down the road, we're hoping we can get enough parameters to make it some sort of model on what we expect the populations to be certain times of the years to help growers make those pest management decisions. This data has still been pretty new. Last year was the first year. It was kind of a pilot year. The soil moisture sensors don't work as well on the muck soils for many reasons. It's hard to determine that. We're still trying to figure that out. But on the sandy soil, we did see a very slight correlation between soil moisture, high soil moisture was negatively impacting the counts that we saw each month. So this year we're redoing that, and we kind of knew some of our mistakes from last year, and we're doing that again this year in order to provide get some data compiled to try to help just discern some sort of model for determining their population dynamics. So that was kind of those 2 pests that I went over. Now I'm going to go over a different kind of event. This is more of I talked about the large spray calibration and those 2 main programs. This is more, instead of an applied research part of my program, this is more of an educational demonstration component. And this is the Spray Rodeo Day, which some of you probably that are in the audience have probably seen or attended. You probably see a lot of spray rigs over there certain times of the year. And basically, as we know, pesticides are applied to millions of cumulative crop acres per growing season. A majority of these are probably herbicides, but in proper calibration of these spray equipment, especially these really large spray equipment like your large ground rigs and then also airplanes, is critical for management of this, because any sort of loss of calibration or incorrect calibration, you can be heavily underspraying or overspraying. Any sort of overspraying, you can cause environmental impacts. Underspraying, you may not be controlling this pest, and you're also losing money thinking that you're putting out some sort of product, but you're not. So one of the services that we do, this was in collaboration with, this was actually a program that Ron Rice used to do, also in collaboration with Jeff Summersill, who's one of our local, he has an airplane spray business. We came together, and before I came, they came together and developed this program, and I've kind of taken it over since. Both Ron and Jeff Summersill have kind of distanced themselves from that because of different positions or other priorities. So The objective of Spray Rodeo Day was to provide educational opportunities for spray rodeo applicator teams. Usually we have the manager and then the actual sprayer, because sometimes the sprayer, the actual person running the machinery, doesn't know all of the details about the chemistries of the products and some of that stuff. So we always have to ask them to bring their manager as well. In order to learn the step-by-step process for calibrating these large boom spray rigs and equipment, determine the accuracy of their own spray equipment. So this is it's basically a service for them, because we're determining whether their systems are even calibrated correctly, which then they can make those adjustments accordingly. And also to teach safe practices that adhere to worker protection standards. This is something that I tried to get our previous ag safety agent, Frank Dowdle. He would come and talk about glove safety, talk about personal protective equipment, some of the requirements that these applicators in enclosed cabs are required to have, especially some of the eye wash kits, the emergency change of clothes, things like that. And our new ag safety agent, Jenna Curtis, is going to be probably involved more with that as these years come with Spray Rodeo. So this is kind of this isn't really just my program. I'm trying to involve other extension people from different areas in, and also other faculty. Dr. Calvin Odero is also heavily involved with this, with his lab as well, and setting this up. So it's a good service for everyone, and it's a good event to be involved with. So kind of the overview of Spray Rodeo. These events are held here at the Everglades IFAS, the UF IFAS Everglades REC. And since 2015, I've done 6 Spray Rodeo days, and we had one canceled because of COVID in 2020. And again, we had one. Usually they occur every February, but sometimes they occur in November. So in 2023, we had one in February. We're going to be having one next week here in November. So that I think that I'm hoping that will be a good success, because we've had a bit of a gap in the actual Spray Rodeo days. It's been almost a year and a half, 2 years since we've had one. So what's the outline of the Spray Rodeo Day? This is more of a drive-through field day versus you go down, you sit somewhere, you learn, kind of a traditional teaching style. So we have these people, these team members bring, again, their large spray equipment, and they go through 3 stations. The first one measures ground speed calibration. The second one looks at spray nozzle output. Remember, some of these spray rigs can have up to 60 to 80 nozzles on them, so they're pretty large. And then the third station, we looked at calibration of onboard computer systems that they have built into these spray rigs. And the end result, it's going to get the targeted GPA, gallons per acre, so what they think they're spraying, and what they're versus what they're actually spraying. And we have seen some significant errors in some of these spray equipments. And when you're spraying that much over that many acres, you can see pretty significant, you see a lot of acres that are being either under or oversprayed. So this is one of the important aspects of this field day. We have a spreadsheet that we collect all the information at these stations. We enter it into a spreadsheet, which then this is an example of the nozzle outputs. So these are all the nozzle positions here, and it's going to calculate this. These red and green bars are kind of within that 10% error range, and then the black is the average. So you can see that some of these nozzles, like this one right here, is probably 15% error, which is a pretty significant. So that's something that will help identify which nozzles need to be replaced for these individual rigs. There's a lot of other spreadsheets. These are just snapshots of the spreadsheets. We put all this information in. They do supply some of this information. And then at the very end, it's going to have your gallons per acre measured, and then your target, and then what your percent difference is. So this person had their actual gallons per acre were 22.49. Their target were 21.22 based on what they gave us. So they had an overall of 5.7% error in their application, which can be significant. And especially when you look at the past 7 Spray Rodeo days, we've had 308 attendees and over 60 large sprayers. And based on these cumulative surveys, these 60 large boom sprayers were responsible for spraying almost 800,000 acres. And that's cumulative. And again, they're spraying the same acreage. That includes acres that sprayed multiple times. So when you have nozzle errors like that, that can be pretty significant. So I think this is why this works. This field day is very beneficial for these spray applicators. And then it also creates an additional event to teach farm safety, some of the worker protection standards. The worker protection standards, many of them were updated about 7 years ago. So again, this gave us another opportunity to reach out to this crowd and tell them about, teach them those changes. And also there's been some changes, as many of you know, to the labels, pesticide labels with the Endangered Species Act. They now have these bulletins. So every 6 months or so, they can change things. A lot of growers and spray applicators are still not aware of that. So again, bringing these people in gives it another opportunity to be able to teach some of these aspects. Okay, so that's the, oh yeah, and then this is some of the data that I collected. This is boom nozzle output. I have it by year. So first year I did it was in 2015 all the way to last year, 2023. And these are rigs that had no errors, 5 to 10% and greater than 10%. And this was the cumulative acres that each of these had. So you can see that there were 27 sprayers over all of the years had errors greater than 10% on their outputs, which is pretty significant. So again, this allows them, they may not have known that, and they could have been messing up a lot of acres because they did not have these sprayers calibrated correctly. So this is something that we've even been trying to replicate in other parts of the state. I've had other states asking me, for some of this information so they can replicate it. Some people with Texas A&M Extension. And I presented some of this work at one of our big extension conferences about 2 years ago in West Palm Beach, and there was a lot of interest in this, especially in areas where that you have large boom sprayers such as this. And there's also an event similar to this, but it targets airplanes. So they have the dyes, they Operation Safe. I worked with it a little bit, not as heavily. I was kind of more of an observer, but they have the dyes. They're able to check all the nozzle outputs and accuracy on these spray applicators, the planes that go by. So it's a really interesting event because again, they're also spraying very large acreages throughout the growing season. So any errors can be really build up over time. So switching gears here to some of the major rice extension programs. The two I'm going to talk about today is the Rice Variety Development Program, which kind of started out small, but it's become quite a big chunk of my time in the past year or two, and I'll talk about that. And then also looking at some of the population dynamics of our rice stink bug complex. We have a unique rice stink bug complex in Florida, and we've been doing some work addressing that. So I'll go over these two programs. So for those not familiar, rice production in Florida, we grow approximately 25,000 acres of rice in this area, and mainly in Palm Beach County. And again, like I said, with that crop rotation slide, it serves as a rotational crop with sugarcane, leafy vegetables, and sweet corn, and it's mainly grown during those hotter summer months. And it grows really well because of all the rain. The rain can be used to put into the flooded rice fields. The growing season is usually from February to October, kind of that opposite end that you see the vegetables. And some of the benefits to rice production include reduction in soil subsidence. So mostly all the rice is grown on those histosols, which are subject to the soil subsidence due to the oxidation of the organic matter, improvements in soil nutrient levels, and then reduction in soil arthropod pests in subsequent crops. So a lot of times people will flood their fields even without rice to help reduce some of the soil pests such as wireworms in the subsequent plantings of sugarcane. So there's a lot of benefits of rice, and a lot of labs, especially Dr. Botta's lab, has really been able to kind of piece some of these out and show the benefits of rice. So some opportunities and challenges of our industry, though, it's very small. When you look at Arkansas, which is the #1 rice producing state, they're at about 1.4 million acres. We say we're at 25,000 acres. We don't even show up on the USDA's crop census maps because we're so small. So I usually put like a little dot on the map. We're about 1% of the total acreage. So we don't have the farming and milling infrastructure. One of the big issues also is our lack of Florida rice varieties. We do not have a dedicated rice breeder in Florida. So we have to take rice varieties from other states, bring them in and assess them in order to determine what is compatible with our more subtropical, even it seems like in some areas it's getting more tropical climates versus much of the rice in the US, which is produced more in that mid-south climate and then also out in California. The economics relative to sugarcane and leafy vegetables aren't there. They're not making nearly as much money, but I think, don't always think how much immediate money you're making as a cash crop, but the value of having that as a rotational crop in the next crop, I think, is one of the more important things that we try to get people to focus on as well. But again, economics. And then we also have a lot of unique pest complexes like much of Florida. Florida is very prone to unique diseases, unique insects, all kinds of things like that because of again, the weather and the climate is very accommodating. So one of the things that we do in order to address our lack of rice breeder is I serve on the executive. I'm the Florida representative on the executive board for the Rice Technical Working Group, which is a national rice commodity group. And we meet each year to talk about new variety development through all the different breeders. And I'm always talking to them, what new rice varieties have you released this year? And can we have some of that seed to test in Florida? So we conduct these rice variety trials each year in order to assess new varieties of rice that have been released by breeding programs across the state in order to determine which ones are highly productive and have good grain yields and also disease resistance in our more tropical to subtropical climates. And usually it's about 10 to 15 varieties a year I would look at and look at various aspects, grain yield, quality, disease resistance, milling quality, all that. And again, this involves a lot of different faculty here. You know, they kind of focus on their specific discipline so these trials are very useful for everyone. So in 2016 to 2022, when I did these trials, they were much smaller. I was only looking at commercially released varieties. So these are varieties that are not experimental, but anyone can obtain them. Typically 12 to 16 varieties, and we plant them at 3 different locations. And there's some of the plot size, seeding rates. Again, these are small plots. These are small plot variety trials. And we had a randomized complete block design with 4 reps and usually harvested approximately 115 days after harvest. These are all planted on Florida Crystal's land. So they've been able to provide us a lot of resources and funding along with the Florida Rice Growers Inc. in order to conduct these trials. And this is an example of some of the data that we would get. You know, we look at grain length, we determine some of if it's hybrid or variety, or it's just the normal commercial, conventional variety. We looked at 50% heading, how many days, because that's generally a time that you use to determine certain pest management strategies. Also plant height, and then these are the grain yields by year in terms of hundredweights. And we would basically harvest everything by hand, we dry it, we thresh it, and then we dry it, and then we weigh the rough rice to get those yields. And that's how we did it all the way up through 2022. And 2016 to 2022, we looked at 16 different variety trials, 25 commercial rice varieties and hybrids were assessed. And we had some of the top varieties that are grown in Florida right now, such as Diamond and Jewel, were actually originated in these rice variety trials. And overall, we've determined that some of the yield increases of up to 11.1% using some of these newer high yielding varieties. So that was up to 2022. So when I was attending the Rice Technical Working Group meeting in not Little Rock, it was, what's the one with the hot springs? Oh, it's called Hot Springs, Arkansas. I was approached by the breeder, Adam Famosa at Louisiana State University. And he's like, you know, I know you guys don't have the amount of acres to justify a dedicated rice breeder, but how about we take some of our rice lines that are still going through the development program at Louisiana State, and you guys can test them in Florida and determine which ones that you like so we can continue those in Louisiana, even if we kind of axed them off the list. So I said, yeah, so it's almost like a proxy breeding program. So this is something that we talked with them, we had a lot of meetings, and now we've been using, instead of, remember we had about 12 to 15 commercially released rice lines. Now we're looking at about 45 to 60 lines, many of these experimental coming from Louisiana State's breeding program. And so we've really expanded these trials. This was the second year I did it. It's been quite a lot of work, but again, I've had a lot of help from the growers in the industry. But everything else has been pretty much the same. We've looked at the plot sizes, seeding rates, everything's been the same. We've dropped the reps down to 3 because the amount of seed that's available for some of these really early, these rice lines that are really early in the development process, they might send us basically like a handful of seeds because that's all they have. It's just enough to do a couple of small plots. And then the harvest date's the same. So this is how big some of these trials are. There were about 180 plots in one of the trials that we had this year, because we had 60 different rice lines. And we also put a few commercial varieties in there kind of as checks, some of the ones that are really popular here in Florida. And we also use these rice variety trials as educational tools. So we allow the growers to go in, because if we are going to be selecting varieties that we want, or experimental lines that we want them to continue growing, I want the growers in the industry to help make those decisions as well, kind of like they do with the sugarcane development program. So this is not, I can make my recommendations, but ultimately it's what the growers want. So again, we cut all these varieties by hand, cut all these rice plants by hand. We assess them in the lab, and then we also received funding from the Florida Rice Growers Inc. for an experimental a lab mill, rice mill, so that we can look at milled yields as well. We can look at some of the quality, the brokens, the how much peck is on them, things like that. So it allows us to basically determine a lot, identify a lot more different factors when selecting these varieties. So you can't, I'm not expecting you to look at this, but you can see how much some of these spreadsheets have expanded some. And again, we've had pretty much the same different type of parameters that we looked at before, but now we're also looking at milled rice per sample, milled rice per acre versus just rough rice, because sometimes when they go to the mill, they take samples of your rough rice and they assess them, and that's how you're graded. So looking at some of these qualities, I think, are really important tools for the rice industry and identifying these experimental lines that we want to move forward with. So I think this has been a great collaboration. It's been a lot of work on my end. I feel like I've added another 30% work from my rice, but I love working in rice. It's such a neat crop, and it's been really good. And I couldn't have done this without the support of the rice industry. They've been very supportive in terms of money, in terms of land, in terms of labor, because again, hand cutting 180 plots in the heat like this, it's, one person could not do that alone. That would be almost impossible. I'd probably still be out there cutting right now. So that's all about the variety trials. I know I'm getting a little short on time, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Florida rice stink bug complex, which is some work I've been doing. We have a very unique rice stink bug complex in Florida. Much of the United States' rice industry really only has one economically important stink bug, which is Ebolus pugnax. With the exception of California, they don't have the stink bugs. Their industry is much different than the rest of ours. And prior to 1994, this was the predominant species in Florida as well, pugnax. It was over 95% of the relative abundance. But in 1994, we received one of the other species in the genus Ebolus ypsilon griseus. And this was some work that Ron Cherry, one of our previous entomologists, did back in the 90s. He found it in 1994. It was first detected in Florida rice. And then in 2007, we found a third species in this genus, Ebolus insularis. And that was also found by Dr. Cherry and Dr. Nestle. And then they did surveys in 2008 and 2009 and found that pugnax, which is the one that used to be the dominant species, represented about 54% of the relative abundance, with the insularis at 20 and ypsilon griseus at 18. We knew how to control pugnax. There was a lot of research on that across the U.S., but these other two species, not so much. But again, they weren't in really high numbers yet, but we were just kind of keeping an eye on them because we didn't really know, are there going to be other management tactics and strategies in order to control these other two species or not? But they conducted those in 2008 and 2009. But as I'll show in the next couple slides, in 2017 and 18, I wanted to replicate those surveys to see after 10 years, has there been any sort of change in that relative abundance, so that we can help determine maybe if these two invasive species are increasing in abundance. So here's the pugnax. This is Ebolus pugnax. This is the one that's been predominant across the U.S. Minus California for some time. Ypsilon griseus was the one that was found in 1994. Really, the only way to truly distinguish these species is by looking at the second antennal segment. So you have to really, it's difficult even to do it with a hand lens, but the antennal segment length is one of the main differences here. And then there's Ebolus insularis. As you can see, it usually has a brighter yellow wings to it, the elytra and whatnot, but that's not always, there's different morphs. You can't always look at color when trying to distinguish these. So having to look at those antennal parts and the spines on the shoulders are really the main distinguishing features. So, and then for sampling for stink bugs, it's usually done about 50% heading. Remember in those rice trials, I was looking at days to 50% heading. That's usually when you initiate stink bug sampling. And use sweep net sampling. There's one of our entomologists, Julian Buslin, sweeping for stink bugs. And the current threshold is 30 bugs per 100 sweeps for about the first 2 weeks of heading, and then 100 bugs per 100 sweeps during the latter 2 weeks of heading. So those surveys I was talking about, they did them in 2008 and 2007, 2008 that Dr. Cherry did, conducted. I wanted to look at those again. So we sampled commercial rice fields in and around the area at 3 sampling periods at each locations at each period. And we looked at the populations and the relative abundance of these 3 species in the rice itself and also along non-crop transects. So they also like to build up in these weeds, these grassy weeds that you see adjacent to rice fields. We looked mainly at diamond and chenier because those were the 2 major varieties at the time. And then sampling occurred during milk and soft dough stage because, again, that's the most damaging phase of the rice stink bug. That's when they really begin to build up. And we ensured that there were no insecticide applications prior to sampling that would really skew our numbers. And we did 3 50 sweep samples at each rice field and weedy transect. And these were at 40, 80, and 120 meters from the front field edge and 100 meters from each margin to reduce any sort of edge effect. So you can see this is a picture of rice. It doesn't look like there's much there, but when you look, there's all these stink bugs hanging out there. And you can see a lot of the Insularis and some of these other ones that are the 2 newer species. So they're feeding on those developing panicles. They're basically feeding on that developing endosperm inside the grains. And they're also causing peck on the rice, on the more developed grains, which can cause entry points for pathogens and also can damage the structural integrity during the milling process. So I'm not going to show all the tables because I'm running out of time, but basically we found that Insularis, which is one of those 2 invasive species, now represented 61.7% of the relative abundance. Remember, it was only 20% 10 years prior. So Insularis is now the dominant rice stink bug in Florida, and this stink bug has not been detected anywhere else in the United States. So we have an issue here. The growers are moderately concerned. Can we treat this the same way as we do pugnax? Can we treat all 3 species as a complex? These are questions that we're still trying to answer, specifically with Dr. Buselin's lab. And in order, because it would be a perfect situation that we could just treat all 3 as a complex, but they may have different seasonality. They may have different behaviors that may limit their exposure to insecticides and whatnot. So we're going to, these are things that we're still trying to determine. This has been one of the programs for insects in rice. So kind of closing here, I just wanted to show some of the activities in the profession that I'm also involved with. In order to gain new knowledge that outside of the state, in order to give to the present to the industry. The Florida Association of County Agricultural Agents. That's our state ag extension association. This year I'm the president of it, so I'm involved with a lot of the planning of meetings and some of these. We do trips to DC each year where I can talk to representatives and senators about some of the ag issues that we're having in Florida. So I think this has been, I went for my first time last year and it was a really eye-opening experience, see all the stuff that goes on in DC and to be able to talk with staff members. And we even got to talk to one of the US representatives and help promote, Florida ag and also give thanks for their support for our ag industry. And also EPAF, it's the Extension Professional Associations of Florida. These are all the different extension associations within our state. And we're involved heavily with that. But, I mean, some of the faculty here may have been at some of those meetings before. And I'm also on the sustainability and marketability subcommittees for the USA Rice Federation. So they have a person from each state that's kind of on a scientific board that helps. We're not voting members, but we help kind of provide our input on certain issues that are going on across the United States in terms of rice. And then also Rice Technical Working Group. That was that one I told you that I meet with the breeders each year to help determine which new varieties that they can give us that we can test in Florida. So again, being in part of these associations, I think has been able to bring a lot of knowledge and also resources back to our industry here in Florida to better our systems to make it more sustainable and help our growers out. And then also on the American Society of Agronomy, I'm an associate editor on their agronomy journals. So it kind of allows me to also just see all the new research coming through when I'm looking through and assigning those papers to reviewers. So trying to be as involved as I can to help Florida and my clientele. So with that, would like to acknowledge all of the faculty and staff and industry collaborators that have made this possible, all this work possible. I'm kind of a one-man show. I don't have a lab. I don't have students and all that. So a lot of this, I have to usually ask help from other people. And I can tell you that everyone's been very generous in the help that and the support that they've been given my program. So I'm very grateful. all of these groups and the sugar corporations and some of the main commodity groups and their financial support and also assistance and land. Again, I couldn't ask for a better group to work with. And I always like to close on this Norman Rockwell picture from 1948. That's the county agent is what it's called. So there's an extension agent. This is from Indiana in 1948, and he's helping a girl. She's got her 4-H clipboard right there. So it's kind of a neat historic picture that if you've seen other Norman Rockwell paintings, they're pretty popular in that time period. And with that, that's all I have, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Congrat it's okay. Congratulations for your presentation and for so important work, okay? Extension is a very important work for us. And I'd like if you could go ahead, how can I say? Go back to a slide that to show the arrows in nozzles, because application nozzles, you have a table.
Ours?
Yeah, the arrows, yeah.
Oh.
Because I was just thinking something about. Yeah. I think it's. No. You have the arrows, the ears in the nozzle arrows. It's a table. Arrows. Let me see. Yeah, that one. Because I don't know if I understand. Because here you have the years, okay? 2015 until 2023. And I suppose or I hope that the errors could decrease. Do you understand me?
Yeah,
Because-
the errors typically decrease on people that we attend regularly,
Yeah,
but we
okay, because I
but
was
we do
thinking
get-
about that, because you told that you have work that you, how can I say, training that's
yeah,
so important,
yeah,
training the
yeah,
farmers, the technicians,
Yeah.
the people that work
Yeah.
to how to avoid error, how
Yeah.
to applying better
So
manure.
I've
And I hope that could
yeah,
decrease.
I've kind of dug into this data a little bit, and people that regularly attend, typically you'll see decreases in their errors,
okay.
but we do get new people that come each year, so
Okay.
that's where it kind of looks like I'm not
Yeah.
really doing any sort of service.
Maybe you can put
Even the
sometimes the difference between people that maybe not attend the
Yeah,
training and
yeah.
people that attending, because
Yeah.
here you can show the importance of your work.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah, I had a
it
bunch
was-
of other slides. I mean, I did a whole 30-minute presentation
Okay,
just on
I
this
saw-
this alone, which I could, yeah.
No, no.
But in terms of time, yeah, but that would be good to put that. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone?
Yeah, this is Ron Rice. I have a question for Matt
Go ahead.
because it's fun to ask him questions. Yeah, so Matt, with your rice variety field days and your rice variety data, what rice traits are growers focused on when they decide to try out a new variety?
The traits that what traits are growers looking at for new rice varieties?
Yeah, like there could be yield, there could be milling quality, there could be agronomic characteristics that
Well,
you see in the field.
It depends if you're from the milling side or if you're from the growing side. So yeah, I think really they're looking at a lot of times the yields and also the disease susceptibility and resistance. Diseases are really bad in our rice in Florida because of the climate, I believe, and other aspects. And we're growing varieties that aren't really specifically bred for this area. So I think when growers are looking through, they're also kind of looking at the leaves and looking at various disease symptoms and things like that. And then I also present them the yield at that time. So they kind of take, I would say diseases and yields, which diseases can relate to yields, and they're related to each other. But and then also sometimes the length of the growth period, because there are some rice lines that have a much greater growing cycle length than others. So I think they sometimes want something that can fit into that rotational cycle, because if something just takes too long, then it might begin to overlap into their into the next crop, you know, because they have to do all the land prep and everything. So, but I would say in terms, some of the meetings that I've attended, it's usually just general yields, but then also some of the diseases, because that's where a lot of the growers will come out into the field, the trials, and they'll look at the some of the any sort of symptoms and on these. But then on the milling side, yeah, that's where the milling ability, that's the some of the hybrids that we've been trying to grow. You know, hybrids typically do really well. The seed's very expensive, but the general trend is that the milling side doesn't like it because of the chalkiness, and it's more I guess it has more wear and tear or time in the mill side. So it's always kind of balancing these two issues on the two different sides of the production cycle.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Appreciate it.
Hey, Matt.
Hi.
Hi, this is Samira.
Okay.
From your experience, can you summarize what has been the most rewarding and the most challenging thing being an extension agent in the area?
I think the most rewarding thing is being able to, well, you know, it feels like you do your job's different every day, but being able to see direct impacts of improving you know, anything relating to our growers and helping, like just assisting in their operations. And, you know, a lot of times they'll come up to me and just, you know, say, thank you for doing this. Thank you. You know, cause it's kind of sometimes like it's a selfless job, and you feel like there's at times you're just working and working. But I think when growers and other clientele really come up to you and show their appreciation for the work, I think that that's one of the rewarding aspects of it. And sometimes it helps me keep going during rough times. But challenging side, I mean, I think it's really managing an extension program with limited manpower. We are basically a little, at least for myself and even sometimes for Anna, it's really just us. And it's sometimes I feel guilty asking a faculty member, can I borrow a few of your students? Can I borrow your intern to help do field work? And again, it's never been really an issue, but I think the amount of work sometimes that's put on us and all the different commodity groups that we have to work with, because every different commodity group thinks that their issues are more important than the other commodity groups. And it can be a lot to put on our shoulders at times.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, for sure.
Hey, Matt, this is Matt. Wanted to ask you about your experience on rice and what you think the future is for rice production in the Everglades. Do you think we're kind of at the high of rice acreage? Do you think it's going to increase, or what do you see as the future?
So the question is, what do I see about the future for rice? I think right now the amount of acres has kind of remained, I wouldn't say stagnant, but it hasn't changed drastically in the past maybe 6 years or so. I think one of the limiting factors is there's always the milling capacity at the mill. And then I think the variety development, I think the amount of varieties and high producing varieties, high yielding varieties that we have in Florida is really important, because many of these growers aren't making a lot of money in terms of this being a cash crop. That's why I'm always trying to tell them, just because you're not making a lot of money as a cash crop for rice, or rice as a cash crop, you got to look, you know, all the benefits that rice is doing for this agro ecosystem in terms of, you know, the nutrient management. It's another source that you can absorb other nutrients in the water to bring into the plants, recycling those, pest management. You're flooding these fields, which can cause decreases in numbers of pests. So it has a lot of environmental impacts in the agro ecosystem that you may not see at the dollar sign right there, but then in times there's got a lot of indirect impacts. But I think sometimes it's, as a grower, as an operation, it's hard to make those investments when you don't see that dollar figure there. So I think if we can identify some varieties that are doing really well, we have 2 that are really well right now. It'd be good to have more. And then also the amount of land that's available, I think, is also a big limiting factor during the summertime as a rotational crop. Again, you can't grow rice really on sandy soils. It doesn't do very well because it's difficult to maintain a flood unless you did an alternate wetting drying. cycle, but so I think it's land availability, milling capacity, and the limited varieties are kind of what are going to be the future of the industry. But yeah, in terms of the past 6 years, there hasn't been much of a change, but there hasn't really been a great decrease either. So.
And I assume that it's also important to sugarcane. My question is why there are not much trials with plant diseases?
That's a good question. We've had, we used to have our previous pathologist, Rick Raid. I would have him come in and rate the plants of all the disciplines, just kind of as a footnote, of all the disciplines. Again, extension, one of the challenges is that we have to be agronomists, we have to be pathologists, we have to be entomologists, we have to be everything. But we're not great at all those different things. I'm an entomologist by training, and I think pathology is what I'm least skilled at. To me, that's the most difficult. So sometimes I don't really think that I'm the most capable person. So I think having, we have a new pathologist coming in that's going to work on rice. I think that's going to be a big asset to this industry. But again, it's been just the transitions of pathologists. I think it's my lack of knowledge. And also we were testing a lot of new rice varieties. There's always new rice lines coming in, and they have different disease susceptibility. There's been years where diseases really skyrocket, and then years where they're not as bad. I know that across the industry, they've had, especially even in Arkansas, I think the year we had really bad diseases last year, they were also having really bad diseases as well. So I think there's a lot of
Hey,
factors
Matt.
and unknowns, but I think with this new, the new person coming, if the new pathologist that'll work on rice, I think that'll be able to really help with that industry, because they've got a big laundry list of things that I think they want done on the pathology side.
Hey, Matt, just to add, so Dr. Monica Orotia, she's online also here attending the seminar, will begin January 1st, and will be our plant pathologist for rice and sugarcane. But also Dr. Cano out of Fort Pierce works a little bit on diseases on sugarcane, if anybody is interested.
Yeah, so they'll have that
Mhm.
pathologist here for the next rice season, so that'll be good.
Yep.